Now of the midterm elections. Congressman Mark Sanford, a former governor of South Carolina, may have learned that the hard way. The incumbent losing in the Republican primary last night. His challenger, Katie Arrington, won following a last-minute endorsements from President Trump. A tweet just 3 hours before the polls closed. This morning, the president then taking some credit, at least, for Sanford's defeat with this tweet. My political representatives didn't want me to get involved in the Mark Sanford primary, thinking that Sanford would easily win. But with a few hours left, I felt that Katie was such a good candidate and Sanford was so bad, I had to give it a shot. Congrats to Katie Arrington. What are the ripple effects after all of this? What's the lesson now for every Republican in Congress? Joining me now, CNN political reporter Rebecca Berg. Rebecca, ripple effect, or is it more like a shockwave?
Well, absolutely, Kate. The clear message that Republicans are receiving today after Mark Sanford's loss is that any Republican who wants to challenge the president is risking political suicide if they do so. Now, we had already seen that in some races with Jeff Flake challenging the president. He, of course, decided not to run for re-election because his polling looked pretty bad. And then we saw, of course, Martha Roby running for re-election in Alabama. Her race is going to a runoff in a few weeks, largely because she was a critic of the president. And so we have seen other test cases for this theory, but Mark Sanford showing us once again just how perilous it is if you are a Republican candidate to challenge the president. He is, as you know, extremely conservative. He has a sterling voting record when it comes to conservative votes. The American Conservative Union supports him. Freedom Works supports him. All of these mainstay conservative groups supported him, Kate, but because he didn't support the president, none of that mattered. It's extremely unusual ideologically. There was no getting to the right of Mark Sanford, but he decided not to support the president.
Yep. That seems to be the case, and that seems to be a very big factor in what we're looking at today. Rebecca, thanks so much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Joining me right now, CNN Chief Political Correspondent Dana Bash and CNN Political Director David Chalian. So, David, try this one on for size as we were reading up this morning. One of the leads for the Associated Press. Over more than 2 decades, South Carolina voters forgave U.S. Representative Mark Sanford for his quirkiness, his infidelity, and his lies. But they could not forgive him for his criticism of President Donald Trump.
Certainly, I would just add the word Republican before voters in that lead. But yes, inside the Republican Party, that is an unforgivable sin to take on the president in the way Mark Sanford has on multiple occasions. And his opponent made a total issue of this, Kate. This was front and center on the campaign trail for her. And Mark Sanford was a little late to the game in taking this primary threat seriously. But what comes out of this is that this is yet another data point. This is Donald Trump's Republican Party. And more than any issue test that voters may be applying to Republicans on immigration or other areas of concern, fiscal responsibility, because here's a true red conservative.
Right.
And what is clear here is that the purity test being applied by Republican voters is loyalty to Donald Trump.
Well, and Dana, I mean, just exactly what David's saying. Mark Sanford was not a never-Trumper. Mark Sanford just spoke up when he saw a difference or didn't like the language that Donald Trump would use on certain issues, speak up on issues that he cared about. He's a member of the Freedom Caucus, and so now it's moderate members don't have a place in the Republican Party, and now members of the Freedom Caucus don't have a place either. Who's left?
Well, you know, yes, he's a member of the Freedom Caucus, but I think, you know, that sort of, it suggests that he is somebody who is in line with the other members, in that most of the other members of the Freedom Caucus don't criticize the president on conservative issues. Maybe they were, you know, they spoke up when they thought he was going to, from their point of view, sell them out on immigration or other things that weren't conservative enough. But I think what's interesting about Mark Sanford is that he is actually has been doing exactly what Bob Corker was literally screaming about on the Senate floor yesterday and will continue to do so today. Speaking out when he sees things that he disagrees with that the President of the United States does. And look what happened. What happened is it has hurt him potentially fatally with the Republican in his seat in South Carolina. And the other thing is that, David mentioned this, Mark Sanford is no moderate. I mean, I remember, I'm old enough to remember, covering Mark Sanford the first time he was in Congress, before he went on to be governor. He was the gadfly. He was the one who was tormenting his party leadership because he was so conservative, mostly on fiscal issues, because they weren't doing enough to lower the deficit and debt and so forth. And now the party has it's so realigned to be, as David said, the party of Donald Trump, that it's scrambled.
David, speaking up against Trump, though, this is clearly is one of the factors, at least maybe the factor that sank Mark Sanford, but it didn't sink everyone. You've got Scott Taylor out of Virginia. He's spoken up when he disagrees. Barbara Comstock, she's also in Virginia. She's spoken up when she disagrees. Is this the difference between South Carolina and Virginia?
In part, some different geographic differences there in makeup of the primary electorate. But Kate, Barbara Comstock didn't become the Republican nominee last night for a district in Virginia with some outsized proportion of the vote. I think she got 60-something% of the vote. That's pretty low for an incumbent running, and she's in a heavily Democratic district and is not likely to return to Congress after November's election. That's a real targeted district. And Scott Taylor, I think, probably took his lesser competition than Sanford was facing all the more seriously this year. So yes, not all things are equal. It's not a guarantee you're going to lose your job from the voters if you speak up against the president. But I think if it is part of your identity, which I think it was for Sanford in the district, and certainly his opponent made it that way, it proved really problematic.
Yeah, if it's branded or if it's reality, it's still the reality when it comes to the election. Dana, sticking on Virginia, the Republican nominee for Senate has made headlines for a different reason. Corey Stewart, I mean, someone who very firmly stood with Donald Trump's position that there were good people on both sides of the issue when we're talking about Charlottesville, saying there's blame to go around. He made that case over and over again when I interviewed him after Charlottesville. Just to remind our viewers, watch this.
The left is doing a very good job of trying to conflate neo-Nazis with conservatives. It's wrong, and the Republicans are refusing to stand up against it. The establishment Republicans are afraid of being labeled by CNN as racist and bigots, and they know that that's exactly what you're going to do, and there's only a few of us who are going to stand up to you.
Is it possible that it's because someone died who is counter-protesting?
So what you're saying, Kate, is that those who,
and someone who
you're
is
trying to
known
conflate,
as
what you're trying to say is
sympathizing with neo-Nazi
this poor woman's death. You're trying to use this poor woman's death to say the Confederate monuments should be taken down. There's no equivalency there.
I'm sorry, is that what I said at all? I'm sorry, is that what I said at all?
That's exactly what...
It stopped being about statues when people showed up with swastikas.
It stopped being about statues when the left came and started the violence. And the violence occurred by both sides, including the left. Where's the condemnation of Antifa?
Of all the things to agree with President Trump on, this is a guy who appeared at public events with a well-known white nationalist leading up to the protests in Charlottesville. If the Republican Party is the party of Trump, is this part of the trend?
Yes, it is. Now, Virginia might be a little bit different because the National Republican Party, they didn't seem to be working as hard as they have been in other places to find a candidate that could beat the incumbent Democrat, who happened to be the guy on the Democratic ticket in 2016, Tim Kaine. So when it comes to kind of the internal fight, there was less of one among Republicans in Virginia. Having said that, yes, I mean, as you just played, Corey Stewart is a absolute supporter of Donald Trump, unfailingly so, and worked for him very, very hard, and that helped Donald Trump back in the 2016 Republican primary. But now it's a different story, and Virginia is also a state that has been trending Democrat, and that also helps the incumbent Democrat, Tim Kaine, and probably makes Corey Stewart appear more of an outlier than he would maybe in other states where it would be more competitive between a Democrat and a Republican.
David?
Yeah, look, Donald Trump tweeted his support this morning for Corey Stewart, and I am sure Corey Stewart is going to wear that with pride throughout this whole campaign. That's different than how we saw Ed Gillespie, who Corey Stewart just fell short to in the Republican primary for governor a year ago, Kate. Ed Gillespie chose a different path, and that didn't work out so well for him against Ralph Northam in the governor's race last year. And so Corey Stewart's going to try and prove that the Donald Trump path to the presidency, that you can keep your rhetoric as red meat for your base through the primary season as you can through the general election season and be successful. That's a tall order in Virginia this year, what is likely to be a Democratic year, but that's the test that Corey Stewart is going to employ.
I, for some reason, don't see Corey Stewart, though, shifting it in his tactics.
Exactly.
Going
He's going to keep the same rhetoric and his appeal all the way through November.
Great to see you. Thanks, guys. Really appreciate it.
Yep.
Coming up for us, the biggest enemy of the United States is not Russia. It's not North Korea. Instead, it's the media. That is according to President Donald Trump. That's not President Donald Trump from the day after inauguration. That's from President Trump this morning, lashing out again at the media just after he sat down with Kim Jong-un. Plus, speaking of critics, Senator Bob Corker slamming Republican leadership for not standing up to President Trump on the issue of trade. His new comments. You want to hear them? That's next. Safer than the day I took office. There is no longer a nuclear threat from North Korea. No longer a nuclear threat. Again, I ask, is this mission accomplished? So far, there's no hard proof that the threat is gone, unless you consider a private meeting, the vague statement and promise that came out, and the handshake all the proof you need. That might not be enough, though, for some of America's closest allies. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is in Seoul right now, trying to straighten everything out. CNN's Nick Robertson is there as well. Nick, what are they saying in Seoul? No longer a nuclear threat from North Korea. Do they think so?
We haven't had that from the government here. So Secretary of State Mike Pompeo doesn't get into those meetings with the president and the foreign minister until tomorrow. But what he has done in the last few minutes as brief journalist has pushed back very heavily on criticisms that this document that President Trump and Kim Jong-un signed didn't have the words verifiable and irreversible in it. He said, look, the word in there, complete denuclearization, the word that's in there twice, he said, absolutely, Kim Jong-un understands that the word complete also means verifiable and irreversible. He said it was insulting, ridiculous and ludicrous that anyone should think otherwise. He was asked about the timeline that he and President Trump have in mind to see this denuclearization. He said that absolutely they want major steps in the next 2 years. Those were his words. He said that he hoped, that word again, hoped that there would be denuclearization in 2.5 years. He said that as long as the negotiations with North Korea continue to be productive, that was how he framed this stopping of the joint military exercises with South Korea. So he said as long as the talks are going along fine, then these joint military exercises, the large-scale joint military exercises with South Korea, would be put on hold. So this is some of the first details additional to what we'd heard yesterday coming from Secretary of State Mike Pompeo.
Fascinating. Nick, thank you so much. Some important elements here. Let's discuss it. Joining me right now, former CIA Deputy Division Chief for Korea, Bruce Klinkner. He's now a Korea Affairs Specialist for the Heritage Foundation. And also with me, CNN politics reporter and editor-at-large, Chris Cillizza. Bruce, what do you think of what Nick Robertson was reporting there from Mike Pompeo, that the United States wants North Korea to take major steps to nuclear disarmament in the next 2 years?
Well, certainly we want North Korea to fulfill its not only its recent pledge in the Singapore communique, but also what it's required to do under UN resolutions, which is to abandon its nuclear, missile, and chemical and warfare programs in a complete, verifiable, irreversible manner. So certainly we're hoping that the recent negotiations will lead to that. On the military exercises, North Korea has long been calling for the U.S. and South Korea to abandon those, in some cases as part of a freeze-for-freeze proposal where they freeze their nuke and missile tests in return for us stopping our exercises. The U.S. has always correctly rejected that initiative or proposal from the North in the past, because any kind of pause could lead to a degradation in allied deterrence and defense capabilities.
Well, that seems to be the route that things are going right now, though, Bruce. I mean, what do you also then make of what President Trump tweeted? That there's no longer a nuclear threat coming from North Korea. That's coming from the president just this morning.
Well, certainly there's been no change in North Korea's nuclear and conventional force threat to America and our allies. The best estimates are North Korea has 30 or more nuclear weapons. We assess that they already have nuclear-capable missiles that can hit all of South Korea and all of Japan. They are working on or nearing completion of nuclear-tipped IRBM, intermediate-range missiles that can hit Guam. And then CIA Director Pompeo said within a handful of months, North Korea would have the capability of threatening the American homeland with nuclear weapons. We've seen no stand down or certainly no reduction in the nuclear force.
Absolutely not at this point. And Chris, then 2 days after sitting down with Kim Jong-un and also saying that he trusts Kim Jong-un, the president then tweeted out this: "Our country's biggest enemy is the fake news." He name checks NBC, he name checks CNN. I mean, I don't care how partisan of times we live in right now. That is bananas.
That's a good word for it. It's also dangerous and deeply irresponsible. I mean, you know, I don't want to sound too much like a scold here, but if you like democracy, you should like a free and independent media. Look at countries that don't have democracies, and one of the hallmarks of them is they don't have free and independent media. I don't even think, candidly, Donald Trump means this, Kate. I think he knows that the media is a good scapegoat for him. Media doesn't tend to fight back. His base hates the media. Donald Trump, I'd urge people, go read the transcript or watch some of his press conference before leaving Singapore. He is overly solicitous of the media. He tells David Sanger, who is a New York Times reporter, also a CNN contributor, I love that piece you wrote about me way back when. He talks with another reporter about a piece he wrote about the Staten Island ferry and Donald Trump decades ago. This is someone who does not view the media in the way that he portrays viewing the media. This is a political gambit, but that doesn't mean that the people who follow and believe in Donald Trump understand that. And that is where I think you get into the danger.
I mean, it gets back to, again, it's amazing how far we've come and how not far we've come, which is taking his words seriously and literally. I mean, you have to, at some point, and I'm sure I'm wrong now. I'm officially wrong. At some point, words matter, and apparently they don't. And that's where we land on this. Bruce, I see you smiling because I know you agree. Kate's words never matter. Great to see you guys. I appreciate it. I really appreciate it. Much more to come on that. But we also have this just into CNN. Republican Senator Bob Corker, who is not running for re-election, remember. He is standing up. He's been a chief critic of President Trump recently, and he very much is now a chief critic of his own party, is in his own party leadership over their loyalty to the president. Let's get over to Capitol Hill. CNN's Manu Raju is joining me right now. Manu, what happened?
Yeah, Bob Corker, the Senate Foreign Relations Committee chairman, has been sharply critical about his party's leadership for refusing to go and confront President Trump on that issue about the president's tariffs on steel and aluminum products, tariffs on Canada and Mexico and the European Union. Corker has a bill that would rein in the president's move on that issue, but the Republican conference is split on this, in large part because the president is sharply opposed to what Bob Corker is pushing. Yesterday on the floor, he attacked his colleagues for not wanting to, quote, poke the bear, referring to the president, saying they didn't want to confront the president. And today, just moments ago, he went after his party again, saying that this administration sort of makes things up as it goes. And this party, in some ways, is, quote, cult-like, referring to the Republican leadership.
So we've got a broad array of Republican senators that are more than willing to deal with this tariff issue, and I thank them. As a matter of fact, we've got a broad array of Democratic senators. But obviously we have some that are like the person you just spoke to who is concerned about midterm elections and doesn't want to upset the president in any way. And it's kind of not our job. Our job is to represent the people of our states and do things that we think are good for our country in the interim. So, there's a definite fear there. I think you know that.
But I mean, look at that. We have
about your party. If you speak out, you're retiring. Jeff Flake's retiring. Mark Sanford got beat last night.
Yeah, but I mean, I got so Lamar Alexander is on the bill. Pat Toomey's on the bill. Johnny Isaacson's on the bill. Who are some of the others? Mike Lee, Sass. So we have several people that are on the bill, but there's no question that leadership in general is wary of doing anything that might upset the president. We're going to be here during recess, generally speaking, which is fine with me, but it's more about Trump being upset than it is anything else. So look, it's just there. It's it's not a place that I wish we were, but especially on something like tariffs that, look, I think 95% of the people in our caucus, at least, are people that feel we should be able to weigh in on the tariff issue, but some of them are not willing to take on the president.
What do you think the ramifications are for your party if you're not willing to stand up to the president on some of these key issues?
I think it's again, I want to say we have a lot of people who are willing to do the things that they feel are right for our country. We have some who are fearful of upsetting the president. Again, it would mostly be around the leader.
And he went on to say that in a lot of ways, this is a cult-like in this party, a cultish behavior for following a president who purportedly is of the same party. That is, in the words of Senator Bob Corker, he didn't say everybody in his party, but in particular, he directed his concerns at Republican leadership, not naming them by name, but clearly he's talking about people like Mitch McConnell, the Senate Majority Leader, the House Speaker, Paul Ryan, the Senate Majority Whip, John Cornyn, people he believes they should be going after on this issue that they all agree on about trade and concerns about tariffs, but something they're not willing to do at this moment. So some strong words from the Senate Foreign Relations Committee chairman just moments ago, Kate.
Yeah, he seems straight up angry right now. Thank you, Monty. Really appreciate it. Thanks so much. Great interview. Coming up for us, criticism of the president is nothing new, of course, but when it comes from the husband of one of his closest and most trusted advisors, and that husband is defending the Russia probe, it raises more than a few eyebrows. That's next. Conway. George Conway has had a lot to say on Twitter about President Trump from March, trolling the White House after a report aides are often undercut in their public statements by the president. Conway tweeted, "So true, it's absurd," which is why people are banging down the door to be his comms director. And then in May, he trolled the president with a tweet about FEC rules after Rudy Giuliani revealed the president had reimbursed his attorney, Michael Cohen, $130,000 for the payout to porn star Stormy Daniels. And now his latest, a lengthy essay titled "The Terrible Arguments Against the Constitutionality of the Mueller Investigation." The column, a direct response to the President Trump's continued declaration that Mueller's appointment was unconstitutional. George Conway writing, "The constitutional arguments made against the special counsel do not meet that standard and had little more rigor than the tweet that promoted them. Such a lack of rigor, sadly, has been a disturbing trend in much of the politically charged public discourse about the law lately." Joining me now, Norm Eisen, CNN contributor, former White House ethics czar under President Obama, and Walter Schaub, CNN contributor and former director of the Office of Government Ethics under President Obama and President Trump. Great to see you both. Walter, what's going on here?
Well, Conway has been a fairly consistent critic of the president. He doesn't seem to share his wife's views. He was at one point up for consideration to be the head of the civil division in the Department of Justice and walked away because of their differences of opinion. And I think he's made a principled stand here in which he lays out a very cogent case for why the Mueller investigation is constitutional and actually goes so far as to point out how silly the contrary arguments are.
Norm, for a president who says if you hit him, he hits back harder, how has George Conway escaped his fire?
It is awkward for the president to blast back at the spouse of a member of his own administration. The important thing here is that, however, is not that Conway is a staff spouse of a very senior White House official. The important thing here is what Conway's saying is totally uncontroversial. Maybe that's why he's escaped. Of course, the special counsel is constitutional. It's been found that way again and again in DOJ opinions, court opinions. There's no authority to the contrary. The president's views are so bizarre and outside the mainstream. Maybe he's ashamed to highlight that by fighting with Kellyanne Conway's husband.
But Walter, as we know from the primary not so long ago, Donald Trump does not see spouses as off limits. Just ask Ted Cruz. What's the case that, I don't know, Kellyanne Conway has to make behind closed doors here?
Yeah, I don't know, and I don't know if she is making a case. You know, she seems to have a privileged status in the White House. She freely violated the Hatch Act on 2 occasions and was found to have done so by an agency led by an appointee who was appointed by President Trump. And of course, while I was at the Office of Government Ethics, she violated the ethics regulations. So on 3 occasions, she's violated laws and regulations related to government ethics and been given a free pass every single time. She certainly is held high in the president's esteem, so high that she appears to be above the law.
Well, and Norm, I mean, as you noted, Kellyanne Conway is in a tough spot here. I mean, she clearly doesn't want to talk about this. We've seen that. But this is kind of how you have to think of it. If David Axelrod's wife was a prominent D.C. attorney and wrote a column that directly criticized then President Obama on a critical issue, we would be talking about it. And so would Republicans.
Yes, but having worked closely with President Obama and David Axelrod, I can tell you that other than perhaps a wry smile, that would have been par for the course, and that's probably the way it should be. Now, maybe this is a new escalation by George Conway, an extended argument. Again, nothing controversial about it. What's bizarre is Trump's view that Mueller's unconstitutional. Trump will say anything. Maybe this new escalation will draw a response, but I think it is proper for us to separate in this day and age between what one spouse does or says, even inside the White House, and what another one does in their private capacity. So maybe for once Trump is acting with a tinge of dignity that, as you point out, has been so lacking when he confronted Andy McCabe, the former FBI deputy, about his wife, when he attacked the looks of Ted Cruz's wife, when he's gone after other spouses. But maybe he's finally doing the right thing here. So we'll just have to see if the new escalation draws a new response.
And just wait for the next George Conway column. Great to see you both. Thanks so much. Really appreciate it. Bizarre.
Thanks for having me.
Is there a cult-like relationship between Republican leaders and President Trump, as Senator Bob Corker, Republican Senator Bob Corker, now says? Can we sleep well at night knowing that North Korea is no longer a nuclear threat? As the decision that could have far-reaching effects for so many companies and the content that you watch, your content you consume on your phones and television. Here with me right now, Brian Stelter, CNN senior media correspondent, of course, the host of Reliable Sources. Brian, the judge even warned the government against filing appeal. So,
right.
Is this the final word? Where is the final word?
This is likely to be the final word. The government has not decided yet whether to appeal or whether to ask for a delay of the ruling while it works on an appeal. Those kinds of moves are common. But yes, the judge in this case discouraged the government from doing so because this process has already taken 600 days and cost an enormous amount of money. The real benefit, the only people really benefiting here are the lawyers from all sides who have racked up a lot of fees. Other than that, this has really dragged on for a long time, and it does appear to be over unless there is that appeal. Now, even if the government does appeal, but there's not a stay, meaning a delay to the ruling, then AT&T will still take over Time Warner next week. That means CNN, this channel, other channels will be owned by AT&T next week. In the short term, not a lot of changes for consumers. In the long term, maybe some improvements to service and products.
Does this open the door for many more mergers like this?
It definitely does, and it's kind of like a domino effect. This was the first domino, but lots of other companies were waiting to see what the judge would do, what the judge would decide before going ahead with their own deals. So as early as today, Comcast could make a bid for Rupert Murdoch's Fox assets. Murdoch's been trying to sell the movie studio, the entertainment channels, not Fox News, but most of the rest of it. Right now, Disney is already trying to buy those assets. Comcast is going to come in and make its own offer, and that's just one of many deals that are expected as a result of this.
Brian, great to see you. Thanks so much.
Thanks.
Let's Follow that and this. President Trump is back from a summit in Singapore, back from his historic moment with North Korea's Kim Jong-un, and back on his Twitter feed, saying everyone can sleep well at night now, declaring that North Korea is no longer a nuclear threat. Is that so? Joining me now, Republican Senator Rob Portman of Ohio. He sits on the Foreign Relations Committee. Senator, thanks for coming in.
Hey, Kate, you bet. Nice to be on with you again.
So you applauded the direct talks with North Korea. The president then, though, tweeting today that everyone can now feel safer. There's no longer a nuclear threat from North Korea. Do you believe that?
Well, it's a step in the right direction. And I have been promoting direct discussions with North Korea, in part because of my experience of trying to get Otto Warmbier, the young man from Ohio who finally came back, but in a vegetative state, and spent 18 months working on that. And it was very frustrating because we sort of couldn't break through to the right level to get answers, even as to his condition. And I do think that with regard to the nuclear weapons program also, it's important for us to have those direct and very, candid and tough negotiations. What will happen, we'll see. I mean, we need to be sure that whatever we see in terms of their commitments are verifiable, because in the past, as you know, what North Korea has done is entered into these negotiations as a way to stall the efforts of the international community to push back on their weapons program and the means to deliver it, the missile program. So, yeah, I think it's trust but verify, and I say trust, I mean, I'm skeptical because of the past. But it's a step in the right direction. Direct negotiations is good. At this level, of course, it's unprecedented. And I do think the communique was positive in the sense of North Korea making certain commitments. Now we got to see if they honor those.
Can you say with confidence, though, that there is no longer a nuclear threat from North Korea because of that communique?
Well, no, of course there's a nuclear threat from Iran, North Korea, other countries that have nuclear weapons and have shown, their irresponsibility in terms of their behavior. In case of North Korea, of course, they also have human rights violations, and I raised the issue of Otto Warmbier, who I actually met with his parents at the airport in Cincinnati a year ago today when he came home in this horrible condition. So you need to be skeptical, Kate, but it's a step in the right direction. And I think it's a very positive development that North Korea is saying these things. Now let's be sure that these are verifiable and that they honor the commitments they've made.
One of the concrete things that was promised was that the U.S. would halt these military exercises with South Korea. The president said yesterday and again today that one of the reasons for doing that is that it will save a bunch of money. We'll save a fortune, is what he said. Is that the case?
Well, relative to not doing it, I suppose so. There needs to be training, so the training exercises would continue in some way. It wouldn't be war games with South Korea, it sounds like, at least in the short term. One thing I think is interesting, at least what I've been told, in terms of the commitment from the U.S. there, is it's a freeze. It's not a delay permanently. In other words, it's still on the sidelines, and if the commitments that North Korea has made are not kept, and they need to be verifiable, as we said earlier, then those war games would continue. So in a sense, it's the maximum pressure campaign, that part of it put on hold while we see whether they're serious. I think that's the right way to approach it. I'll be with Admiral Harris this afternoon, who's, as you know, the former commander for that region, for the Pacific region, and is now up for nomination as the ambassador to Korea. And I'll be talking to him about that because I think he has a very good perspective on this, and I'm frankly very pleased that he's being nominated for this job.
I'm interested to hear that perspective, so please share when you do speak with him. I want to ask you about tariffs. You're concerned about the escalating trade tensions with Canada and other allies. Senator Bob Corker, fellow Republican, of course, he wants to do something about it. He's trying to limit the president's ability to use this national security rationale to impose tariffs and go around Congress. He's not getting a vote on it, and he's not happy about it. Listen to this.
We might poke the bear. The president might get upset with us as United States senators if we vote on the Corker Amendment. Well, we'll do what we can do, but my gosh, if the president gets upset with us, then we might not be in the majority.
The point he's making is that you all are too scared to do what's right. Is that what's happening here, Senator?
Well, it's very complicated with trade, as you know, Kate. I'm the former U.S. trade representative, and so I've, been involved in some of these issues. In this particular case, of course, we have a situation where it's the national security bill called the National Defense Authorization Bill, and this is a revenue measure, so if it got put on there, the House would have the ability to send the bill back to us, and we have to start over because revenue measures have to begin in the House. So that's a process issue. But I think Bob Corker raises a good point with regard to the fact that the tariffs that are being imposed because of the use of this 232, which is for national security, aren't necessarily being used properly. In other words, I do think there's a national security issue with regard to our steel and aluminum industry. No question about it. I think China, in fact, is the problem. They had 15% of the world production 15 years ago. Now they have 50%. They don't need it. They're trying to dominate it. I'm convinced of that. And they do sell their product under cost and subsidized. And we don't want to drive out all the steel jobs. We've lost 1,500 jobs in my state of Ohio in the last few years alone. But having said that, you need to use the national security part of this in a very selective way where there really is a national security risk. And in some areas of steel, like electrical steel, we have a real problem. We have one manufacturer left. They say they're going out of business. We need it for our grid. We've had a 100% increase in imports. So that's the way you use it. But to use it in a broad-based way, as we have, for instance, with regard to Canada and Mexico and the EU, I think is a mistake. And I think it actually risks the World Trade Organization finally ruling on this issue in a way that would take away that authority. So I think there's a good point to be raised here substantively on trade. It's complicated, but the reality is that this is a very specialized tool that ought to be used in a very targeted way.
When there's a will, there's a way, Senator. At least they used to think that. Maybe not. I want to talk to you about elections, but we've run out of time, and I got some breaking news I got to get to. Thank you, Senator, always for coming on. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Take care.
We have some breaking news coming in right now I want to get to. Just handed to me. President Trump's former attorney, former personal attorney, his so-called fixer, Michael Cohen. We know his name very well now. His New York home, his office, his hotel room, all raided by the FBI in April. He just split from his legal team. CNN's chief political analyst, Gloria Borger, has all the details for us. Gloria, what does this mean?
We're not sure what it means. We do know that he is split with his legal team that has been representing him through this criminal investigation. And we know that this could signal a change in strategy, although we are told that Michael Cohen has not met with prosecutors, and we are not sure whether he will or whether the prosecutors want to meet with him to cut any kind of a deal. ABC News was the first to report this shift in a legal team, but at this point, we're just not sure what Cohen is going to do. I've been told by one source that what he really wanted was a New York lawyer, somebody with experience in the Southern District of New York, where he is likely to face criminal charges. But we're not sure at this point whether this means that the strategy shift could become Michael Cohen meeting with prosecutors to cut some sort of a deal. It's too early to say.
About an important development when this man is in the fight of his life right now, in the midst of all of this, right?
He is, and it's clearly affecting him. He's clearly been very unhappy. You know, as we all know, his home and his office were raided, and it is something that has upset the president very much. And that perhaps Michael Cohen has decided to shift his strategy in this, and we're just going to have to wait and see. We have not gotten a comment from his previous attorneys, and we are not yet sure exactly the name of his new attorney. I'm told the deal has not yet been finalized.
All right, Gloria, stick with me. Let me bring in also CNN legal analyst Paul Callan. Paul, what's your reaction to this? In the middle of the fight of his life, he's splitting from his attorney. What is it? What do you take?
I agree with Gloria. We don't have enough information to reach a firm conclusion on this, but my own sources in New York indicate that Cohen has been considering a change of attorney for a while. He used Steve Ryan, his current attorney, who's a Washington, D.C. based attorney and very, very highly regarded, because he wanted a big firm, the McDermott, Will and Emery firm, in for this 5 million document review. And it's not unusual at all to use one firm for one kind of task and then use a different attorney for a different task. The next task that Cohen faces, if he's indicted, he's going to be indicted in New York in the Southern District. So he's going to want a trial attorney who's wired into the Southern District, who's familiar with trying cases in the Southern District. And Steve Ryan is known, at least now, more as a Washington lawyer. Now, in fairness to Steve Ryan, he's a very well-regarded, and he's tried criminal cases as well. But this doesn't necessarily mean that Cohen is cooperating. It could mean a lot of other things.
Does it matter, Paul, who dropped who?
No, because it could. You don't know what the backstory is between the attorneys and Cohen. If they got wind of the fact that Cohen was looking for a change, that angers them, and they're probably happy to get out of the case. They may have come in only for the purpose of handling the document review. I mean, we really don't know at this point.
You know, and Kate, Steve Ryan was originally hired, don't forget, to kind of shepherd Michael Cohen through his congressional testimony. I mean, that is his area of expertise, and Cohen, I know, really wanted a Washington attorney to help him, you know, navigate that morass before Congress, which he did. And then suddenly this turned into a very, very different kind of a case. And I'm told that Cohen decided that he now needs a different kind of lawyer with more experience in New York.
What does this mean? Look, the president has weighed in on this case early, right? The fact that there's no longer attorney-client privilege, Gloria, and calling it a break-in at every turn. I wonder if this becomes a new chapter and if this means anything different for President Trump in terms of his exposure now.
Well, we do. I can't answer that, but we do know. But we do know that the president was very upset about the raid of Michael Cohen's office and his home. He publicly called it a disgrace. Privately, my sources are telling me that it was a game changer for the president because he found it so appalling that his personal attorney's office was raided, and it has affected even the president's lawyers' attitude towards the special counsel and his team. I think they're trying to navigate their way through that now as they talk about potential presidential testimony, but it is something that affected the president deeply and personally, and he was very upset about it.
Yeah, and Paul, the fact that a source tells Gloria that Michael Cohen has not yet met with prosecutors to speak about a potential deal, and unclear if one side is seeking it at all.